Morning, everyone. It is the appointed hour. We have a quorum present, and therefore I would like to go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Douglas County Board of Commissioners, which will be conducted in compliance with Nebraska's open meeting laws, a copy of which is on the back wall. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Mike is asking me to remind people that there is an automatic defibrillator at the back of the room also. We will convene first as the Board of Equalization. Mr. Clerk, could we please have the roll call?
Commissioner Borgeson? Commissioner Boyle? Here. Commissioner Kavanaugh? Here. Commissioner Kraft is present virtually but cannot vote. Commissioner Morgan? Here. Commissioner Rogers? Here. Mr. Chair?
Present. Thank you. Item A, approval of the minutes from Tuesday, November 10th. Item B is calling for Tuesday, December 8th as a date for hearing on certified assessment corrections. Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Morgan to approve A and B. Questions or comments? Then could we please vote?
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Item C, citizens' comments. Is there anybody wishing to address the Board of Equalization on any item that is not on the agenda? This is the opportunity to do so. Good morning, Mr. Bowman.
Good morning. My name is Monty Bowman with Abris.
Right in the mic, if you would, please.
My name is Monty Bowman with Abris.
Okay.
We've got just one sheet of paper that we want to share.
I can still barely hear you. I want to make sure everybody can hear what you're saying. If you pull the mic a little closer to you, Monty, the mic with the red light. Okay, yeah, I guess I don't see one of them. But in any event, I want to make sure everybody can hear you, Monty. Excuse me,
Okay.
Please go ahead.
There's just one sheet of paper that I'm sharing. This is from a 2018 referee recommendation. This has been going on since 14, continues now, but the language they used at this time is much more specific. And it comes around the fact that the county assessor uses the cost approach for new and unique properties. They use Marshall and Swift valuation services, paid subscription service, to create that. And that's also available to every referee, every coordinator in their professional capacity, but they absolutely have no access to this whatsoever as referees or coordinators. So no matter what, if you're a bowling alley, a bank, no matter what your argument is, they don't have access to anything on the cost approach to make any adjustments whatsoever. And that's what they're referring to as it's embedded into their system. This was something we just discovered in the last few weeks and started going back a little further. And it was just in the 18 that they were very specific about the language that they don't have access to that. So if you ask a citizen about the condition and quality of their property, we are in a floodplain, we can prove that. They don't have access to make those changes whatsoever, none. So you can make the arguments all day, but they don't have the tools available, so you're not going to get any kind of a fair hearing whatsoever. And I just mentioned this just a few weeks ago to Mr. Goodwillie and to Dan, and said this was an issue I've got to address way before anything else on a presentation, because that's just basically, you can't have a hearing. You can file a protest all you want. All they can recommend is for the county assessor to make the change because they don't have access to do it. That's a big problem, because anybody under the cost approach is going to have, you're not going to be able to get it changed.
All right.
So it's how do the referees, how do the coordinators get access to that? Because some of these may be coming back for confession of judgment. And I know because we've appealed some based on condition, quality. Some of them we know are in a floodplain. They're not designated as floodplain. If you want to complain about the quality, the condition, how many stories is the building? Is it classified in the right classification? How many square feet? That means the referee can't change any of that. And that's a big argument that all taxpayers are going to be bringing up. Because if you say the square footage is wrong, they can't change it. So we've got to figure out a way for them to have access to that, because otherwise, even if we do another hearing, they still won't have access.
All right,
So that's what our big worry is.
okay, thank you. Questions or, well, we aren't supposed to interact much here, just supposed to listen. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll have to take it up and make sure that we're as well prepared going forward as we can be.
I mean, I know that we're going to be ending up looking at a confession of judgment. Is there something that says that we will be able to address this at that time before we have to bring these back? Because we have a few at Turk right now, and this is something that we should be able to try to settle here locally, because if we can't settle it here, then that's going to be the same problem again next year. It's just obvious they've never had access for the last 6 years. So before they even start anything in a confession of judgment, and I've talked to Turk enough to know, because of the heavy load, they're going to be making some suggestions for confession of judgment if it's possible. So I just want to make sure that they're going to be addressing this,
Okay,
and finding a way to make sure it's accessible.
all right, thank you.
All right?
Would anybody else care to address this board under citizen comments? Okay, if not, we will move to resolutions D through F. And motion to approve D through F and adjourn by Commissioner Rogers, seconded by Commissioner Boyle. Questions or comments? Then could we please vote?
One moment, please. Okay, thank you. Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. We next will convene as the Douglas County Board of Corrections. Could we please have the roll call for that?
Commissioner Borgeson? Commissioner Boyle? Commissioner Kavanaugh? Commissioner Kraft is present virtually but cannot vote. Commissioner Morgan? Commissioner Rogers? Mr. Chair.
Present, thank you. Item 1 is approval of the minutes from the Board of Corrections meeting October 13th. Motion by Commissioner Borgeson. I will second that to approve the minutes from October 13th. Questions or comments? Then could we please vote?
This is, we're on corrections. Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Citizens' comments. Would anybody care to address the Board of Corrections on anything not on the agenda? If not, we turn to the report from the Director of Corrections. Good morning, Mr. Myers.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning, Mike.
Mike Myers, the Director of Corrections for Douglas County. You have before you my report. This is for the month of October. And I see a typo right off the bat. It should say following the third month of the fiscal year. We were over budget. Much of this can be attributed to CARES projects and I'm going to admit, overlooked one cost of all these CARES projects when we were calculating them, and that is the amount of our staff that it's going to take to be with all of the construction projects, of which there are 8 going on simultaneously at our campus right now. So we do have some additional overtime costs that we're incurring that months ago when we were putting our proposal together that we did not include in our equation. We did spend $354,051 on overtime during October. That was an increase of about $108,000 over the previous month. which is attributed to the reasons that I just gave in large part. Since these projects are ongoing till the end of the year, and they're now working on multiple shifts, we do anticipate that we'll continue to have higher than anticipated overtime costs throughout the rest of the year. And I've been having some conversations and emails with Mr. Lorenz to talk about our options regarding our budget in terms of the overtime costs for our CARES projects. Enclosure number 2, community corrections and in-house programs. Due to the continued impact of COVID-19 on community corrections, our data is significantly different than the norm. Many staff have been repurposed to allow essential functions to continue. Work release, reentry assistance program in the therapeutic communities, the GED and the law library were all suspended during the month due to COVID-19 challenges in CARES construction projects. We are continuing to serve individuals in the law library through individual requests. Our reentry services staff have continued to basically become our virtual court staff, and they facilitated 426 court hearings and facilitated 70 hours of review of discovery material. We do have a plan to return those staff to their primary job duties by early 2021. 24/7 sobriety, again, has continued to be drastically altered from its normal operations during the pandemic. Nonetheless, that program still is operating and still has people being placed on it. There were 62 individuals placed on the program. There were 1,233 breath tests administered using remote testing technology. 21 of those tests were positive for alcohol use. There was 1 no-show for breath testing, and the overall compliance rate was 99.9%. 24 individuals were monitored for SCRAM monitoring for a total of 546 days. There were no-shows, there were 2 tampering violations, and 0 alcohol violations. The SCRAM compliance rate was also 99.9%. There were 52 saliva drug tests administered with 2 violations, and there were 121 drug testing patches submitted for testing with 29 violations. Work release was closed for the month. House arrest admitted 83 individuals. The reentry assistance program was closed. In our therapeutic communities in the jail, we have resumed some limited programming. As our staff have time between court hearings, they go back up to the housing units, provided that they have not been impacted by COVID, and are providing some activities in one-on-one and small group activities in those programs. Pretrial services continue to provide daily information to the courts regarding candidates for bond reduction and early pleas due to the response to the pandemic. 31 individuals were referred for priority prosecution, saving 195 bed days. 313 individuals were placed on pretrial release. 1,348 people in total were managed on pretrial release with a 92% compliance rate. And as alluded to earlier, the law library has been closed, but individual requests are still being handled. Enclosure number 3, compliance. The American Correctional Association was on site the week of October 26th to conduct our accreditation audit. The auditors were very complimentary of our staff, of our facility, and our operations. The jail was found to be 100% compliant with all mandatory standards and 90% compliant with non-mandatory standards. To put that in context, there are nearly 400 standards for the jail. We were non-compliant on 2 mandatory standards because of physical plant constraints for which there's no workaround, and we've been non-compliant on those standards in previous audits as well. We were also non-compliant on a recreation-related standard due to changes in our procedures that we've been forced to make during the pandemic. Community corrections, despite the fact that they were closed during the audit, was found to be 100% compliant with all mandatory and all non-mandatory standards. So for those who are unfamiliar, the accreditation process is a 3-year process, and you have to provide evidence that you followed these standards throughout that 3-year period. So even though most of community corrections has been closed since about the 1st of August, we were still able to demonstrate that we had been compliant with those standards. I want to congratulate all of our staff who make our department a success. And a special thank you to our compliance staff who carefully prepared for this audit under challenging circumstances. Enclosure number 4, personnel. 16 officers graduated from the training academy on October 30th. 4 officers, all below the rank of sergeant, left employment during October. This is an improvement over the previous few months. We concluded the month having 373 of our 396 authorized uniform staff, a net loss of 4. A class of 22 new officers is scheduled and has begun training on November 9th. This will bring us very close to our authorized strength, probably for the first time in close to a decade. Also during October, Harvey Bertley was promoted to the rank of sergeant. Congratulations to Harvey on a job well done. Enclosure number 5, our population. There were 1,356 admissions, 1,333 releases. Our high count was 1,261. Our low count was 1,187. Our average daily population was 1,221, which was an increase over September. However, I'm giving you this report a little bit later in the month than I normally would, and I'll let you know that our population has backed off somewhat during the month of November, thankfully. Custodial sanctioned bed days were at 85. The U.S. Marshal population increased. The ICE population remained stable. The felony pretrial population increased. The misdemeanor population, pretrial population, increased. Probation violations remained stable, and the female population increased, and all 4 female housing units were open. Medical intake, medical, enclosure number 6. There were 1,152 intake screenings, and there were 329 physical and health assessments. Inmates were sent out 23 times for emergent medical care. 10 of those were by 911. There were 13 hospitalizations, which resulted in 55 days of hospitalization. Again, that's like opening up another housing unit for one person at the jail for 50, each time we have to do that, because we do have to staff that 24 hours a day. So that is that is a higher number than normal, which probably also contributed to our increase in overtime. Enclosure number 7, mental health. There were 69 initial psychiatric assessments. There were also 69 initial mental health assessments. There were 48 mental health infirmary placements. There were 3 referrals to the Board of Mental Health and 2 long-term psychiatric facility transfers. Other noteworthy items. The Department of Corrections continues to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. As cases began rising in the community, we began to see an impact at the Department of Corrections as well. Thankfully, the number of cases remained relatively low, and we did not have large numbers of staff infected. The incarcerated population remained largely unaffected during October. Several CARES funded renovation and improvement projects are underway and will continue for the remainder of 2020. The delivery of our first virus-killing robots is scheduled for November 19th. So we did get that first shipment in, and they've been getting used widely throughout the jail. We have an additional part of our order which should come this week, and the final part of our order will arrive early in December. We are continuing to move forward with purchases funded by CARES to develop the ability to provide a wide variety of programming virtually. Our classroom-based programs have been largely suspended during the past several months, and we hope that this is a first step to resuming those badly needed services. Renovations to our pre-book area of admissions were completed in October in anticipation of 2 body scanners arriving in November. After installation and staff training, we expect to go live with our body scanners today, actually, and in about 40 minutes. There'll be a person on site from the company to assist us with our first live scans. So thank you for your support on that initiative. This will greatly improve the safety, both of arresting of law enforcement and for corrections, as we have a scanner on each side of the wall, so to speak. Pre-book, which will, those scans will be done in the presence of law enforcement as individuals are being arrested, but before they're in our custody, and also inside the facility to be used for a variety of other purposes. So we appreciate your support for us to move forward on those 2 items. The vendor for tablets for the incarcerated population was selected, and now the lengthy process of planning and building infrastructure needed to implement the tablets has begun. There are many educational, family communication, and security advantages which will improve the overall functioning of the Department of Corrections when this project is completed during 2021. Proposals for body-worn cameras are currently being evaluated, and we anticipate this project will be implemented in 2021. The new security system continues to move forward. The selection of camera models and software was completed in October. The new system will be implemented in phases across the entirety of the Department of Corrections campus throughout 2021, and will likely be fully implemented by the first half of 2022. And with that, I am ready for your questions.
He answered everything. I see no questions. Commissioner Boyle.
Thank you, Mike. That was a very good report. I want to ask you a couple of things, and I think I see the answer here. But it deals with booking. You know, we had that god-awful event where the fellow got in with a gun and everything. We're using the body scanner. Is that what we're going to use one? And would you talk a little bit more about that so the taxpayers understand what's happening over there?
So this is something we actually have had our eye on for quite some time, well before this event occurred. And ironically, this board approved the purchase of the first body scanner 5 days before that incident occurred. It just hadn't been installed yet at that point. It's a very sophisticated, basically allows us to see anything that's metal or non-metallic, anything that doesn't belong on or in a person. There's, one of the biggest risks that we have are people who attempt to swallow drugs when they're arrested rather than being charged with the possession of them. And we've had some very near misses with people who've subsequently overdosed with that. This will allow us to identify these substances right up front as soon as they're arriving at our facility, should something like that have happened. We will also be able to detect weapons, knives, firearms, anything that may have been missed by a law enforcement officer. The technology is quite impressive. I'm anxious to be able to get a time when it's safe to bring you down there and show you how it works. The images can be manipulated in a variety of ways to make them clearer, to make objects jump out at you so that you can identify them, and then we can deal with them in a manner that, depending upon what it is we find, deal with them in a manner that promotes the safety of everybody, including the individual being scanned. All protocols and safeguards regarding radiation and so forth that are associated with are implemented and followed. There are daily and annual limits that someone can be exposed to radiation, and the scanners themselves actually police that by telling you you can't scan this person anymore today, or we have to decrease the dose, the strength of the scan because this person's approaching an annual limit if they've been scanned frequently. I don't anticipate that will happen very often, if ever, because you absorb more radiation flying in an airplane than you do from these scans. So it is a very small amount of radiation, but nonetheless, we do have standards and protocols that we need to follow, and we will, to assure that our staff who are operating the equipment and the individuals who are being scanned are safe. We purchased 2 of these scanners. One is in the pre-book area, so that's an area where it's kind of the in-between where law enforcement has arrived with an individual being arrested. They're not yet in our custody. It's sort of the transition point between law enforcement custody and corrections custody. They're inside the building, but they haven't crossed a threshold yet. We will now place a staff member. We've been placing a staff member out in that area anyway to do COVID screening. So we will now use that person additionally to operate the scanner. And so an individual will come in, law enforcement will bring them in this time of year, remove their coats, empty their pockets, so forth. The person will go through the scanner. It's a conveyor belt. The conveyor belt moves them through the scanner. It takes about 8 seconds, and then probably 30 seconds for the officer to interpret the images and decide whether there's anything that needs further investigation. So we're very anxious and have been for a long time to have this technology available.
Good, that sounds great. And then you'd be using one in the building to be sure that something hasn't happened while
Correct. For individual, if we have somebody who we think is a higher risk, who's gone out to court or gone out to an off-site medical appointment, we can scan them as well. Our trustees who work in the kitchen, there's time we search them for utensils and things that they shouldn't have tried to sneak out of the kitchen. So we can utilize the scanner for those purposes as well. What's really going to be an advantage is that this will pick up both metallic and non-metallic items, which is not something we've had the capability of doing up till now.
Okay. Then I wanted to ask you, if I could, about GED. I know the rules have changed on them, and so we don't have so many accomplishing their GED, which bothers me a great deal. I'd like to figure out what we can do to get back to what it was, because we had a lot more people that were getting their GEDs. And I just bring that up because we need to, I think, continually talk about what we can do to make it better. Because I think there are a lot of groups that are operating in the community to try to help people move it back into the community after they've been incarcerated. And one of the tools is, of course, education and GEDs. Then I wanted to bring up bail, and I don't expect any answer today, but I'm still concerned very much about bail, people who are incarcerated because they simply can't make bail. It's all financial, and it really does a lot of damage to whatever kind of a family they have, whoever they're responsible for. And so I'd like to begin with particularly Commissioner Borgerson has worked on it quite a bit, talking about bail, and other commissioners too. So maybe we'll set up some other meetings to talk about that.
Commissioner, we just actually kicked off, and I didn't include it in this report because it happened in November.
Okay.
We did the formal kickoff to a process where we're engaging our local criminal justice stakeholders in implementing a new pretrial system altogether, from a risk, a new and what I believe better and more informative risk assessment, and pairing that with the development of services and supervision tools that we can use to match with the risk that individuals present.
Okay.
And that is not, designed to replace cash bail, but it is designed as to give judges choices besides cash bail that they can use to assure that people are safe and that community is safe, and that we don't do unnecessary damage to people's livelihoods and so forth that we maybe could have worked through with, GPS monitors and drug and alcohol, monitoring and maybe having a social worker involved with them. We can keep them, their life moving forward in the positive ways that they already have, and not have everything grind to a halt with all of the consequences that brings to it. So that process, it's a year-long project, and it kicked off just a couple of weeks ago. And we have good support. We have judges from county and district court, law enforcement, from OPD and the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, representatives from the county attorney's office, city prosecutor, public defender, and corrections, all working together to develop this. And then separately, there is a bail fund, a research project on bail funds that we were selected as the second site for that Harvard is actually doing. They're doing San Antonio and Omaha. And that'll be, they want to study the impact of how people of similar backgrounds, similar offenses, similar histories, how people do when they're not incarcerated pretrial compared to being incarcerated pretrial, and see what the outcomes are. Because we really have to ask ourselves, are we really making the community safer by incarcerating people pretrial if we just set them up to be that much more in a desperate situation a few months down the line?
Right.
So your question is well timed, and we do have quite a bit of things that we hope to develop in the coming months.
All right, that'll be great. We'll figure out some way to communicate with COVID
Yes,
in
absolutely.
place and get all this information. I really appreciate it, Mike. And again, you're doing, you and your staff are doing a terrific job. And Mary Ann has arranged all that food we talked about.
All right, perfect.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Further questions or comments? Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thanks for this. I have a copy, I guess, I don't know if it didn't come with tabs this time, but I'm looking for the two things. I found the authorized and on-hand page, and the pages don't seem to be numbered either, but it looks like we've made significant progress in beefing up the on-hand personnel there to overall 92.9% of the authorized 476. You're at 442. Kudos on that. What would you ascribe the increase in our ability to staff corrections to?
A couple of things. One, we've made some improvements to training. We've made some improvements to, I think, recruiting and our hiring process. We overhauled from the ground up to make that much more efficient. We had some bottlenecks that slowed things down that we've overcome. Involved a lot more people in the process, which has made it much more efficient. And we are trying to instill that, corrections is a tough job. It's a tough profession to last in. And, some of the things, we have a lot of goals in terms of trying to counterbalance that for our staff, and we're not there yet. We're not and because this year has unfolded how it has, we haven't made some of the progress that I would have hoped in that sort of staff wellness and development. It just because we've been so consumed with responding to the pandemic and civil unrest and other issues that we've had to deal with. But we have that, I do believe that our focus on our newer staff is paying dividends in terms of them staying longer and more of them making a career of it so far. We still need to do better than what we're doing. But between retaining a little bit better and getting quite a bit better in the hiring process, I think those are the reasons we've made the gains that we have.
Well, kudos on that, and I think that's, you know, if you follow the graph that you have there, you know, shows steady improvement since 1919. And in this time of COVID pandemic, that's really a remarkable accomplishment. Thanks for that. The other thing, and again, I don't have a page number here, but it's the racial demographics that.
My apologies for, I
No,
didn't
no
realize,
problem.
I believe 40 of 49. And I did have our admissions manager add a couple of different graphs to make them a little more, I didn't take out any of the old ones, but I added some ones that I felt were a little more.
No, definitely, you know, an improvement, and thanks for that. It does indicate the current population to be about 65% minority population in the correction center overall. And we've talked about this in the past. It doesn't seem to change much. It would be helpful in these reports, and we get these from the youth center, if we could see a historical overview, go back and tell us, you know, what's the percentage going back. I don't know how long you've been keeping these demographic records, but it would help us benchmark whether or not we're seeing any move whatsoever in the minority-majority population that seems to be chronic in our correction system and our youth center population. So if that could be possible, but am I right? It doesn't seem to have moved from the 65% minority-majority in our correction center population.
Unfortunately, Commissioner, I think you're correct. And I haven't seen a lot of movement in that. And we do have this data going back for years and years, so I will, for the next report, have our admissions manager present something graphically so that you can see kind of over the course of time if there has been any changes. Because I can't tell you assuredly that there has or hasn't been. My anecdotal observation is that these dynamics have remained pretty stable.
And, you know, we all recognize you have no control over this. You take who comes to you. And so it's not your doing that there's a 65% minority-majority chronic majority-minority population in our correction center. That's not you. That's the system. But appreciate that. One thing that might go with that is on our staffing. What's the racial demographic of our staff? And if you could maybe break that out for us next time, that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Further, Commissioner Boyle.
One thing I want to mention that's related to that doesn't have anything to do with corrections, but yesterday I received a phone call from a friend of mine from way back who's a black contractor, and who pointed out that he hasn't seen any employment of black people, and this has nothing to do with you, Mike, on the mall, which is by the city, and also by Douglas County and the Building Commission on the Juvenile Justice Courthouse site. And just didn't see any black contractors and wondered what's going on. So I talked to the Paul Cohen at the Building Commission, then I talked to Bruce Carpenter at HDR. He called me, and they're going to they had a meeting this morning with Kiewit, the contractor, about bringing some black contractors in. And to me, that is a real key to the problem. When we have more black men in jail, it means we don't have black men at work. And that's what needs to be acknowledged, and we need to pay attention to it. And that's a responsibility of all of us in government positions to try to turn this around so that black people, black men particularly, but women as well, are employed, and that stops a lot of this the need for what takes place that makes them end up in corrections. So, and Commissioner Borgeson was working on that, and she's done some things to lead us, the county board, in opening up our employment opportunities. So we need to pay attention to that really a lot, because that will help drive down the population, I think. Not immediately, but over time. So I just wanted to get that out.
Thank you. Anything else for the Board of Corrections for our director? We do not have need that I am aware of for executive session. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
I will.
Mike. Have a good Thanksgiving, Mike.
I will. Thank you, Mike. I will declare that adjourned, and we will now convene as the Douglas County Board of Commissioners. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Borgeson? Commissioner Boyle? Commissioner Kavanaugh? Commissioner Kraft is present virtually but cannot vote. Commissioner Morgan? Commissioner Rogers? Mr. Chair.
Present. Thank you. Item 1A, minutes and claims, approval of the minutes from the Commissioners' meeting held November 10th. Item B is approval of claims for payment through Tuesday, December 1. Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Borgeson to approve items 1A and B. Are there questions or comments to either of these? If not, Commissioner Morgan will be abstaining. One of the checks is to his company. Could we please vote?
Motion passes. Commissioner Morgan abstaining, all other commissioners voting yes.
Thank you. This brings us then to the consent agenda. We have a pretty long consent agenda. We have a motion and a second by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Boyle to approve the consent agenda. You will find items A through K on there, and many of those have as many as 13 subdivisions. A pretty lengthy list. Questions or comments, any items anybody would like pulled out for individual attention or discussion? Commissioner Kavanaugh.
I just have some informational questions on a number of items. Item E, which is a resolution approving consulting agreement to Touchtone Strategic Consultants for services of Dr. Ralph Lassiter to facilitate Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Committee and to conduct an employee survey, not to exceed $10,000. Is this general funds?